The Valtorian armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 200 warships filled the darkness with their lights. High Commander Zalvon stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and felt satisfaction. This fleet represented the full might of the Empire. No power in the galaxy could stand against it. Humanity would finally learn the price of defiance. Sensors immediately detected the human fleet. Zalvon studied the tactical display. 97 human vessels in defensive formation around Earth. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Their ships were smaller. Their technology was inferior. This would be a massacre. He ordered his fleet to advance in standard battle formation. Perfect discipline. Overwhelming force. The way the Valtorians had won 1,000 conflicts before. Admiral Taeyang watched the enemy approach from his flagship. His hands were steady on the command console. Around him, his bridge crew worked in focused silence. They knew the odds. They knew most of them would probably die in the next few hours. But they also knew what they were fighting for. Earth floated below them, blue and beautiful. Home, worth dying for. The Valtorian fleet moved through the outer system in perfect order. They passed the orbit of Neptune, then Uranus. Saturn's rings glittered in the distance. Zalvon was in no hurry. Let the humans watch their doom approach. Let them feel the weight of inevitable defeat. It would make their surrender sweeter. Intelligence Officer Haya Jin watched from a hidden observation post in the Kuiper Belt. Her small stealth ship was practically invisible. She monitored Valtorian communications and sent final targeting data to Admiral Taeyang. The enemy had no idea what was waiting for them. They thought they knew everything about human defenses. They were wrong. The Valtorian fleet reached weapons range. Zalvon gave the order to open fire. 200 ships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. Energy beams cut through space. Plasma cannons lit up the darkness. Missiles streaked toward the human defensive line. It was beautiful and terrible, the full power of the Empire on display. Admiral Taeyang's ships maneuvered desperately. They used Earth's moon as cover. They hid behind orbital stations. They fired back, but their weapons seemed weak compared to the Valtorian barrage. 4 human destroyers vanished in the first exchange. Explosions blossomed where ships had been seconds before. The Valtorians advanced, preparing for a second volley that would break the human line completely. Then Project Sentinel activated. Throughout the solar system, hidden weapons platforms came online. Thousands of kinetic missiles launched simultaneously. They accelerated to near light speed in seconds. The Valtorian sensors finally detected them, but it was too late. Point defense systems designed for slower projectiles could not react fast enough. The first wave struck home. 15 Valtorian ships exploded. 20 more took heavy damage as the missiles punched through their shields like they were paper. The perfect formation collapsed. Captains broke ranks to maneuver. Some tried to retreat. Others pushed forward, trying to get close enough to the human fleet that the missile platforms could not fire without hitting friendly ships. Zalvon shouted orders, trying to restore discipline. But his fleet had never faced anything like this. The hidden weapons kept firing. More ships died. The tactical display turned from confident green to panicked red. He realized with cold horror that he had walked into a trap. The humans had not been defending. They had been baiting him. Admiral Taeyang saw his moment. He ordered the human fleet forward. At close range, the Sentinel platforms could not fire without risk. But human ships could. The battle became brutal and personal. Ships passed within kilometers of each other, trading fire at point-blank range. Armor melted. Hulls cracked. People died by the thousands. Human captains used desperate tactics they had practiced for weeks. Ramming maneuvers, proximity detonations, targeting ammunition stores instead of armored sections. They accepted losses that would horrify a traditional military commander. But every human ship that died took Valtorian vessels with it. The exchange rate was terrible, but it was working. Colonel Dongjun led a boarding assault on a Valtorian battleship that had been disabled by missile fire. His Marines launched from a transport and used magnetic grapples to attach to the enemy hull. They cut through the outer armor with plasma torches and flooded into the corridors. The Valtorians fought back, but they were not prepared for close combat against opponents who seemed to have no fear of death. Dongjun's team fought through deck after deck. Every corridor was a battlefield. His soldiers fell, but they kept pushing forward. They reached the reactor core. Dongjun set the overload sequence himself and ordered his team to evacuate. Only half of them made it back to the transport before the battleship exploded. The blast destroyed 3 nearby Valtorian ships that had been moving to assist. 4 hours into the battle, Zalvan reviewed the damage reports with growing despair. 80 ships destroyed or disabled. The humans had lost 63, but they showed no sign of stopping. Reinforcements were arriving from the outer system. The hidden missile platforms still had ammunition. Worse, his remaining ships were exhausted and damaged. Morale was breaking. He considered his options. He could press the attack and probably destroy Earth, but it would cost his entire fleet. The High Council would never forgive such losses, even in victory. He could retreat and face disgrace, or he could find some middle path that preserved both his fleet and his honor. There was no good choice. Then a communication came through on all frequencies. Ambassador Daehyun's voice filled every ship in the system. He offered terms. The Valtorians could withdraw immediately. Humanity would not pursue, but if they remained, every single Valtorian ship would be destroyed. The missile platforms had enough ammunition to fire for days. More human fleets were coming. This was their only chance to leave with something intact. The broadcast was calculated. It gave Zalvan an excuse to retreat without complete humiliation. He could claim he was preserving his fleet for future operations. He could say the tactical situation made continued engagement unwise. It was a lifeline disguised as a threat, but it was also completely true. If he stayed, he would lose everything. Zalvan made his decision. He ordered the withdrawal. His heaviest battleships provided covering fire while the damaged vessels retreated. Human ships pursued briefly but did not press too hard. They were content to see the enemy leave. One by one, the Valtorian ships jumped to hyperspace. The great armada that had arrived with such confidence fled in disorder. When the last enemy ship disappeared, a cheer went up throughout the human fleet. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had defended Earth. Admiral Tae-yang allowed himself a moment of relief before ordering rescue operations for crew members in damaged vessels. The celebration could wait. Too many people needed help. The cost was staggering. 71 human ships destroyed, nearly 2 million military personnel dead, hundreds of thousands more wounded. Earth's orbital infrastructure was in ruins, but the planet itself survived. The people below were safe. The Valtorian Empire had been turned back. On the Eternal Dominion, High Commander Zalvan sat in his command chair and stared at the empty space where Earth had been visible. He had lost 97 ships, nearly 1 million Valtorian warriors, 4 battleships. It was the worst defeat the Empire had suffered in living memory. The High Council would demand explanations. Some would call for his execution. But as he thought about the battle, one truth became clear. The humans were not like other species the Empire had conquered. They did not break when beaten. They did not surrender when outnumbered. They fought with a ferocity and creativity that decades of warfare had not prepared him for. The attack on Terra Nova was supposed to intimidate them. Instead, it had transformed them into something dangerous. Ambassador Daehyun watched the recordings of the battle from his quarters aboard a command ship. He felt no joy in the victory. Too many had died. The war was far from over. The Valtorians would regroup. They would come back stronger. But humanity had proven something today. They could stand against the greatest military power in the galaxy and survive. Commander Jiwoo walked through the streets of Earth's capital, helping with recovery efforts. Buildings had been damaged by falling debris from the orbital battle. But they still stood. The people were shaken but alive. Children played in the streets, not fully understanding how close they had come to annihilation. She smiled at them and felt hope for the first time since Terra Nova burned. Dr. Hajun and Engineer Bora reviewed data from Project Sentinel. The weapons platforms had performed beyond expectations, but they were now mostly depleted of ammunition. Rebuilding them would take months. They discussed improvements and refinements. The next battle would require new innovations. The Valtorians learned fast. Humanity would have to learn faster. News of Earth's defense spread across the galaxy within hours. Species that had suffered under Valtorian dominance saw that the Empire could be beaten. 3 subject species declared independence. The Keltorian Consortium publicly announced their alliance with humanity. 2 council members proposed stripping the Valtorians of their permanent seat. The political landscape was shifting. But Admiral Tai Yang knew the military reality. Nexus Prime floated in the exact center of civilized space. The massive station was bigger than most moons. It housed the Galactic Council, where representatives from thousands of species came to settle disputes and make laws. The station was designed to be neutral ground. No weapons were allowed. No military ships could approach within a light hour. Here, civilizations met with words instead of violence. The council chamber itself was enormous. It had to be. Some species were tiny, no bigger than insects. Others were giants that measured their height in stories. The chamber used advanced technology to accommodate them all. Atmosphere zones kept everyone comfortable. Translation systems made every language understandable. Holographic displays let everyone see and be seen. 12 species held permanent seats with veto power. They were called the Council of 12. These were the oldest, most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. The Valtorian Empire was one of them. Humanity was not. Humans had observer status, which meant they could watch but had limited voice in decisions. That status was about to matter very much. High Commander Zalvan stood at the speaking platform. He wore his full military uniform, covered in medals and honors from 10,000 years of Valtorian dominance. He looked confident. He looked righteous. He began his presentation with a tone of sadness and duty. He showed images of the destroyed research facilities on Terra Nova. He claimed these were weapons laboratories working on reality-warping technology. Such weapons were banned by the Treaty of Cosmic Preservation. Every council member had signed that treaty. Creating such weapons was one of the worst violations possible. It threatened all life in the galaxy. Zalvan explained that Valtorian intelligence had confirmed the weapons program. He showed documents that appeared to prove it. He displayed footage of scientists working with dangerous equipment. He presented testimony from sources who claimed to have seen the weapons being tested. It was all very convincing. It was also completely false, the High Commander continued. He said the Valtorian Empire had tried diplomatic solutions first. They had sent warnings. They had offered inspections. Humanity had refused. They had hidden their work and accelerated the program. The Empire had no choice but to act. The preemptive strike on Terra Nova was regrettable but necessary. 20 million deaths were tragic, but billions had been saved. The chamber was silent as he finished. Many council members nodded. The Valtorian Empire was respected. They had maintained peace for millennia. If they said humanity was a threat, it was probably true. Several species began murmuring agreement. A few prepared to vote for sanctions against humanity. Then the doors opened. Ambassador Daehyun walked in. The chamber fell completely silent. He was not wearing diplomatic robes. He wore the dirty ash-stained uniform of a Terra Nova civil defense volunteer. Blood was still visible on his sleeves. He carried no documents, no data displays, no prepared presentation. He walked to the speaking platform with slow, measured steps. High Commander Zalvan watched him approach. The Valtorian's expression showed satisfaction. He expected the human to break down, to beg for mercy, to make an emotional scene that would only prove humanity's weakness. Instead, Daehyun stopped at the platform and stood in silence. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as possible. When he spoke, his voice was calm and cold. He began by thanking the council for the opportunity to speak. He acknowledged that they had heard serious accusations from a powerful empire. He understood their concern. Anyone would be worried about weapons that could destroy reality itself. Such weapons would be terrifying. If they existed, action would be necessary. Then his tone changed. He asked the council a simple question. Did they know what the alleged weapons facilities actually were? Did they know what research was being conducted? Did any of them bother to check the facts before accepting Valtorian propaganda? Daehyun activated a holographic display. It showed the real footage from Terra Nova. Not edited, not manipulated, raw recordings from security cameras, personal devices, and orbital satellites. The council watched in growing horror as the truth played out before them. The footage showed Valtorian warships appearing without warning. It showed them immediately opening fire on population centers. No warning was given. No demand for surrender. No targeting of military installations. The ships fired on hospitals. They fired on schools. They fired on residential neighborhoods where families were eating breakfast. The timestamps proved that the bombardment began before the Valtorians sent any communication. The coordinates showed that the alleged weapons facilities were actually agricultural research institutes and medical centers. The scientists who died were not building weapons. They were developing better crops and cures for diseases. Dae-hyun showed communications logs. Months before the attack, human researchers had shared their work with Valtorian inspectors. The Valtorians knew exactly what was in those facilities. They knew there were no weapons. They bombed them anyway. The ambassador's voice remained steady as he presented each piece of evidence. He showed the faces of the dead, children, elderly, doctors, teachers, farmers, 20 million souls who had done nothing wrong. 20 million people murdered because an ancient empire feared the potential of a young species. High Commander Zalvan tried to interrupt. He demanded to speak. He claimed the evidence was manufactured. Dae-hyun ignored him completely. He continued talking as if the Valtorian did not exist. He explained that humanity had studied galactic history carefully during their 5 years of contact. They had learned about dozens of species that had challenged Valtorian dominance. All of them were now extinct or enslaved. The pattern was always the same. The Valtorians would identify a potential rival. They would manufacture a crisis. They would attack under the cover of righteous defense. Then they would present the galaxy with a story about preventing a greater threat. The council would nod and accept it because challenging the empire was dangerous. Dae-hyun's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The entire chamber strained to hear him. He said that humanity had come to the stars with hope and wonder. They wanted to learn, to share, to make friends among the countless species that filled the galaxy. They dreamed of a future where humans walked beside aliens as equals. The Valtorians answered those dreams with fire and death. They slaughtered millions. They burned cities. They made orphans and widows. And then they tried to blame humanity for their own massacre. They thought the galaxy would believe them because they were old and powerful and humanity was young and weak. His voice rose suddenly, sharp and clear. Every being in the chamber jumped at the change. Dae-hyun looked directly at High Commander Zalvan as he spoke. His words cut through the air like a blade. 3 simple words that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. You attacked our home. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted in 100 different languages. Some demanded sanctions against the Valtorians. Others called for investigations. A few species that had suffered under Valtorian control saw their chance and joined the outcry. The careful order of the council dissolved into chaos. High Commander Zalvan's face twisted with rage. He threatened consequences for anyone who sided against the Empire. He reminded them of Valtorian military power. He suggested that supporting humanity would be very dangerous for smaller species, but his threats only made things worse. Now everyone could see the iron fist beneath the diplomatic glove. Dae-hyun did not wait for the council to restore order. He had said what he came to say. He turned and walked toward the exit. His steps were steady. His back was straight. As he passed High Commander Zalvan, he paused. The two looked at each other for a long moment. Zalvan had lived for centuries. He had commanded armies. He had crushed rebellions. He had stared down warriors from 1,000 species. But something in the human's eyes made him hesitate. This was not fear. This was not pleading. This was a promise. This human was not broken. This human was not asking for mercy. This human was declaring war. Dae-hyun walked out of the chamber. Behind him, the debate raged on. 3 council species formally condemned the attack. 5 others began quietly distancing themselves from Valtorian trade agreements. The diplomatic isolation had begun. But Zalvan knew that words would not be enough. Humanity would not be satisfied with council resolutions. They wanted justice. They wanted revenge. Back aboard the Indomitable, Captain Minho waited for Dae-hyun's return. The ambassador's shuttle docked and he stepped onto the ship. Minho asked how it went. Dae-hyun smiled for the first time since the attack. He said the Valtorians had made a mistake. They thought destroying Terra Nova would break humanity's spirit. Instead, they had awakened something they did not understand. The attack was meant to demonstrate power, to show the galaxy that the Valtorian Empire could destroy anyone who challenged them. But they had forgotten something important. They had forgotten that humans remember. They had forgotten that humans do not forgive attacks on their homes. And most importantly, they had forgotten that the most dangerous enemy is not the one who has nothing to lose, but the one who has already lost everything. The galaxy had seen the truth, Now they would see what humanity could become when pushed to the edge. The Valtorians wanted a demonstration of power. They were about to get one. But it would not be the weeks after the council session changed the galaxy. Ambassador Dae Hyun's speech spread across every communication network. Billions of beings watched the recordings. They saw the evidence of Valtorian crimes. They heard the human ambassador's words. 3 council species formally condemned the attack and demanded reparations. 5 others quietly began ending their agreements with the Empire. For the first time in millennia, the Valtorians found themselves isolated. But diplomatic victories meant nothing without military strength. The Valtorian Empire still commanded the largest fleet in the galaxy. They controlled the most important hyperspace routes. Their technology was generations ahead of most species. Words and council resolutions would not stop them if they decided to finish what they started. Prime Minister Kyung-suk spoke to the United Terran Assembly from a hidden command center deep underground. Her injuries from the evacuation had healed, but the pain in her voice remained. She declared a total mobilization. Every human colony would contribute. Every factory would be converted to military production. Every scientist would work on defense. Every citizen would play a role in survival. The response was immediate. Shipyards that built cargo haulers now constructed warships. Research facilities that studied peaceful technologies turned to weapons development. Mining colonies doubled their output of strategic materials. Training camps filled with volunteers. Humanity had 30 scattered colonies across as many star systems, all of them prepared for war. Dr. Ha-jun led the weapons research program. He was given unlimited funding and authority. His team worked 18-hour days. They studied captured Valtorian equipment. They tested new theories. They pushed the boundaries of physics and engineering. The goal was simple but nearly impossible. Develop weapons that could defeat an enemy with thousands of years of technological advantage. Meanwhile, High Commander Zalvan faced his own problems. The Valtorian High Council summoned him to their chambers on the homeworld. The ancient beings who truly ruled the Empire were not pleased. The attack on Terra Nova was supposed to be clean and decisive. Instead, it had become a disaster. The Council demanded explanations. Zalvan stood before them and accepted responsibility. He had underestimated humanity. He had thought overwhelming force would break them. He had not anticipated their ability to turn tragedy into strength. The High Council listened and then gave new orders. Resolve the situation quickly. Eliminate human leadership. Occupy the colonies. Present the galaxy with a finished conquest before meaningful opposition could form. The first test came at Arcturus system. A Valtorian battle group entered the system expecting to find a mining colony with light defenses. They planned to destroy it and broadcast footage as a warning to other human settlements. What they found was Captain Minho waiting for them. Minho had been promoted and given command of a fast attack squadron. His ships were smaller than Valtorian cruisers, but they were quick. He had hidden them among the asteroids. His crews had studied every piece of data from the Terra Nova attack. They knew Valtorian tactics. They knew their weapons ranges. They knew their weaknesses. When the Valtorian battle group moved into the asteroid field, Minho sprung his trap. Human ships emerged from hiding and attacked at point-blank range. They used the asteroids as cover and weapons. They lured Valtorian vessels into collision courses. They targeted specific systems instead of trying to destroy entire ships. It was brutal and desperate, but it worked. 2 Valtorian cruisers exploded. A third lost power and began drifting. The battle group commander ordered a retreat. He could not accept losing more ships to what should have been an easy victory. But the retreat came too late for Minho. His flagship took a direct hit from a heavy plasma cannon. The bridge erupted in flames. He barely made it to an escape pod before the ship broke apart. The Battle of Arcturus was humanity's first real victory. They had lost 8 ships and nearly 3,000 people, but they had proven something important. The Valtorians could be beaten. It required accepting terrible losses and using unconventional tactics, but it was possible. News of the victory spread through human space. Hope replaced some of the despair. High Commander Zalvan studied the battle recordings with growing concern. The humans were learning impossibly fast. Tactics that should take decades to develop appeared in weeks. They adapted to Valtorian weapons and countered them. They showed creativity and willingness to sacrifice that he had never encountered. For the first time, he wondered if the Empire had made a strategic error. While military conflicts raged, Ambassador Daehyun received a secret message. It came from the Keltorian Consortium, a group of merchant species that controlled significant trade networks. The Keltorians had suffered under Valtorian economic dominance for centuries. They saw an opportunity in the conflict. They offered humanity covert support, technology that the Valtorians had kept from younger species, resources smuggled through neutral space, intelligence about fleet movements and military plans. In exchange, they wanted humanity to break the Empire's grip on the galaxy. Daehyun agreed immediately. He understood that humanity could not win alone. They needed allies, even secret ones. The Keltorian support proved invaluable. Dr. Hajun's team received technical specifications for Valtorian shields and weapon systems. They studied the data and found weaknesses. They discovered that Valtorian shields were designed primarily to defend against energy weapons. Kinetic weapons, physical projectiles, could penetrate them more easily. Engineer Bora took this knowledge and ran with it. She designed a new weapon system combining human theoretical physics with Keltorian quantum mechanics. The result was a kinetic missile that could accelerate to near-light speed using quantum tunneling. When it hit a target, the impact released devastating energy. Better yet, the missiles were cheap to produce in large quantities. Testing proved the concept worked. A single missile could cripple a Valtorian cruiser. A dozen could destroy a battleship. Production began immediately. Every factory that could be converted started making the weapons. Admiral Taiyang, newly promoted to Fleet Command, began planning how to use them. But the Valtorians were not idle. Intelligence Officer He Jin, leading human espionage efforts, sent urgent warnings. Valtorian military communications showed massive fleet movements. Ships from across the Empire were gathering. The target was clear: Earth. Humanity's birth world and spiritual center. The Valtorians intended to destroy it as they had destroyed Terra Nova. The news hit humanity like a physical blow. Terra Nova had been their capital, but Earth was their origin. 12 billion people lived there. Countless historical sites, the cradle of human civilization. If Earth fell, something essential would be lost forever. Prime Minister Kyung-suk called an emergency meeting of military and civilian leadership. The debate was fierce. Some argued for evacuating Earth and defending the colonies. Others insisted Earth must be protected at any cost. Admiral Taeyang listened to both sides and then presented his plan. It was risky, possibly insane, but it was their only chance. They would evacuate as many civilians as possible, especially children. But the military would stay. They would fortify Earth's orbit with every ship and weapon they possessed. They would use the new kinetic missiles. And they would make the Valtorians pay such a high price that even victory would feel like defeat. The plan was approved. Massive evacuation convoys began leaving Earth. Millions of children and essential personnel fled to the outer colonies. It broke hearts to send them away, but it was necessary. Better some survive than all perish. The military forces that remained prepared for the largest battle in human history. Dr. Hajun worked with Bora to install the final component of their defense, Project Sentinel, a network of automated weapons platforms scattered throughout the solar system. Each platform carried thousands of the new kinetic missiles. They were connected by quantum communication, allowing them to act as one coordinated weapon. The platforms were nearly invisible to sensors. The Valtorians would not see them until it was too late. High Commander Zalvon assembled his fleet. 200 warships, the largest military deployment in Valtorian history. He boarded his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and addressed his commanders. This would be the final blow. Earth would burn. Humanity would be broken. The galaxy would remember that challenging the Empire meant extinction. The fleet entered hyperspace. Their journey would take 2 weeks. Zalvon used the time to drill his forces. He had learned from Arcturus. The humans would not surrender easily. But numbers and technology remained on his side. No force in the galaxy could stand against this armada, or so he believed. On Earth, Admiral Taeyang stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the defensive positions. 97 human warships against 200 Valtorian vessels. Impossible odds. But humans had faced impossible odds before. They had survived when they should have been destroyed. They had fought when they should have surrendered. Now they would show the Valtorians what desperation truly meant. Commander Jiwoo led the ground forces that remained on Earth. If the Valtorians somehow broke through the orbital defenses, her troops would fight in the streets. They would make the enemy pay for every meter. The morning started like any other on Terra Nova. The sun rose over the capital city, painting the towers gold and orange. Ambassador Dae-hyun stood at the window of his office, watching the streets below fill with people heading to work. He held a cup of coffee and smiled. Today would be historic. After 5 years of careful negotiations, humanity would finally sign a formal alliance with the Valtorian Empire. His assistant knocked and entered. She carried a stack of documents that needed his signature before the ceremony. Dae-hyun took them and began reading through each page carefully. These agreements would open new trade routes, share technology, and guarantee mutual defense. Humanity had been exploring space for only a century, but they were making friends among the stars. The Valtorians controlled a third of the galaxy and commanded respect from every civilization. Their friendship meant security and prosperity. Far above the planet, Captain Minho commanded the defense station Unity Watch. His shift was quiet. Sensors showed nothing unusual. A few cargo ships moved through the system. Some private vessels traveled between Terra Nova and its moon. Everything was normal. Minho sipped his tea and reviewed the schedule for the day. The Valtorian delegation would arrive at noon. His station would provide the honor escort, guiding their ships to the landing platforms. He checked his watch. 2 hours until the Valtorians arrived. He decided to run one more system diagnostic to make sure everything worked perfectly. His crew deserved recognition for their preparation. This would look good in his report. At exactly 11:45, the sensors screamed. Minho jumped from his chair and stared at the displays. Dozens of ships were emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the system. No, not dozens. Over 100. His hands flew across the controls trying to identify them. The computer confirmed what his gut already knew. Valtorian warships. A massive fleet. He opened a channel to the lead ship. Maybe this was a misunderstanding. Maybe they brought an honor guard that was too large. The channel connected, but no one answered. On his screen, he watched the Valtorian fleet form attack positions. His heart went cold. Minho hit the emergency alert. Sirens blared throughout the station. He opened channels to every defense platform in the system and to the military command on Terra Nova. His voice stayed calm, even though his hands shook. He reported what he saw. A Valtorian fleet in attack formation. No response to communications. Weapons charging. In his office, Dae-hyun heard the sirens and ran to his window. He saw flashes of light in the sky. Bright explosions blossomed where the orbital defense platforms had been. His communicator buzzed with urgent messages. Military command was shouting orders. The government was evacuating. The Valtorians were attacking. He stood frozen for 3 seconds. His mind could not accept what was happening. They had been preparing for a celebration. Now weapons fire was raining down from orbit. He grabbed his communicator and ran for the exit. His security team met him in the hallway and pushed him toward the emergency transport. The city erupted in chaos. People in the streets looked up at the sky where fire was falling. The first bombardment hit the government district. Buildings that had stood for 100 years vanished in clouds of dust and flame. The ground shook. Windows shattered. People screamed and ran, but there was nowhere safe to hide. Captain Minho ordered his small fleet of patrol ships to engage the enemy. They were hopelessly outnumbered, but they had to try. They had to buy time for people to evacuate. His ships accelerated toward the massive Valtorian battle group. The enemy barely seemed to notice them. Point defense lasers swatted his vessels like insects. He watched 5 ships disappear from his tactical display in the first minute. He changed tactics. Instead of fighting, he would save who he could. His flagship, the Indomitable, was big enough to carry thousands of refugees. He plotted a course to the government complex where the leadership would be gathering. If he could save them, humanity would have a chance to respond to this madness. On the ground, Commander Jiwoo led her Special Forces team through burning streets. They had been training for a parade. Now they were fighting to establish evacuation corridors. She carried civilians who could not run. She shot down debris falling toward crowds. She screamed orders over the sound of explosions. Her team moved like a machine, saving everyone they could reach. A little girl stood crying in the middle of a collapsed building. Jiwoo sprinted toward her and scooped her up just as another bombardment strike hit nearby. The blast threw them both into a crater. Jiwoo covered the girl with her body as fire and metal rained down. When the smoke cleared, she checked the girl for injuries. Scratches and bruises, but alive. She handed the child to one of her soldiers and kept moving. Ambassador Daehyun reached the landing pad where Captain Minho's ship was descending through the flames. The Indomitable was already damaged. Hull plates glowed red from heat. One engine was failing, but it was still flying. The rear cargo bay opened and hundreds of people rushed aboard. Soldiers pushed the crowd forward, packing them in tight. Daehyun saw Prime Minister Kyung-suk being carried aboard on a stretcher. She was injured but conscious. Dr. Ha-jun stumbled up the ramp carrying hard drives full of research data. A dozen other officials and military officers crowded into the bay. Daehyun climbed aboard and turned to look at his city one last time. It was dying. Fires burned everywhere. The beautiful towers were crumbling. The streets were filled with the dead and dying. He could see bodies in the rubble. He could hear screaming even over the roar of the ship's engines. This was supposed to be a day of joy. Instead, it was apocalypse. The Indomitable lifted off and accelerated hard. More people were running toward the landing pad, but there was no time. No room. Minho pushed the damaged engines as hard as they would go. Valtorian fighters noticed them and gave chase. Minho's pilot threw the ship into wild maneuvers. They barely escaped, leaving atmosphere with enemy weapons tearing apart the air behind them. The bombardment continued for 6 hours. When it finally stopped, Terra Nova was silent. 20 million people were dead. The capital city was ruins. Industrial centers were destroyed. The orbital defenses were gone. The Valtorian fleet held position above the planet, their weapons still charged and ready. Then they broadcast a message on all frequencies. High Commander Zalvon appeared on every screen that still worked. He declared that Terra Nova had been developing illegal weapons. He claimed humanity was planning to attack peaceful civilizations. He said the Valtorian Empire had acted to prevent this threat. The bombardment was justified and necessary. The message was a lie, and Daehyun knew it. So did everyone who survived, but the Valtorians were broadcasting it to the whole galaxy. They were framing humanity as the aggressors. They were justifying mass murder with propaganda. Aboard the Indomitable, Daehyun watched the recordings of the attack play over and over. His hands were steady now. The shock had passed. What remained was something cold and hard. Captain Minho approached and stood beside him. The captain spoke quietly. The Galactic Council had called an emergency session. The Valtorians would present their version of events. Humanity would be allowed to respond. It was supposed to be fair, supposed to be neutral. But everyone knew the Valtorians had power and influence. Humanity was young and weak. The Council might not listen. Daehyun turned away from the screens. He looked at Minho and spoke for the first time since the evacuation. His voice was quiet but absolutely certain. He would go to the Council. He would speak for the dead. He would tell the truth about what happened here. The Valtorians thought they could destroy humanity's home and then lie about it. They thought humanity would be too broken to fight back. They were wrong. The attack was meant to show Valtorian power and human weakness. Instead, it had awakened something in humanity that the ancient empire did not understand. They had struck at home. They had killed innocents. They had lit a fire that would not be easily extinguished. Daehyun walked to his quarters to prepare. He had a speech to write. The galaxy would hear humanity's voice. They would know what the Valtorians had done, and they would understand that this attack, this massacre, would not be forgotten or forgiven. The Valtorians had made a terrible mistake. They had let witnesses survive. This victory had cost them dearly. The human fleet was battered. Their industrial capacity was stretched. The Valtorian High Council met in emergency session. The defeat at Earth sent shockwaves through the Empire. For 10,000 years they had been invincible. Now a species barely a century into space travel had humiliated them. The news spread like fire across the galaxy. Subject species whispered about resistance. Trade partners renegotiated contracts. The Empire's grip on power was slipping. The council chamber was ancient and vast. 12 beings sat in seats carved from crystal, their faces hidden by ceremonial masks. They had ruled the Empire for generations. They had crushed rebellions and destroyed civilizations. But they had never faced a problem quite like humanity. These humans refused to follow the normal patterns. They refused to break. High Commander Zalvon stood before them and waited for judgment. He expected execution or permanent disgrace. Instead, the council offered him something unexpected, a chance at redemption. They were changing strategy. Military force alone would not solve the human problem. They needed diplomacy, isolation, and time to rebuild their strength. Salvan would lead this new approach. The council also revealed something surprising. Not all of them had agreed with the attack on Terra Nova. Some had seen it as reckless and unnecessary. The Empire was not as unified as it appeared to outsiders. There were factions, disagreements, the hardliners who wanted total war, the moderates who sought diplomatic solutions. The attack had been ordered by the hardline faction without full council approval. Salvan accepted the mission. He would go to the Galactic Council and work to isolate humanity politically. He would convince other species that humans were dangerous and unpredictable. He would buy time for the Empire to rebuild its fleet and develop new tactics. Then when the moment was right, they would strike again. But this time they would be prepared. On Earth, Prime Minister Kyung-suk met with her advisors. The victory had bought time but not security. The fleet was damaged. Industrial capacity was stretched to breaking. Colonies remained vulnerable. Dr. Ha-jun reported that Project Sentinel could not be quickly rebuilt. Each weapons platform required rare materials and months of construction. They could not rely on the same trick twice. Admiral Tae-yang presented his assessment. The Valtorians would return with a larger fleet and new tactics. They would study the Battle of Earth and develop counters to every weapon and strategy humanity had used. The next confrontation would be even more difficult. Humanity could not win a prolonged war of attrition against an empire that controlled a third of the galaxy. The consensus was grim but clear. Humanity needed allies, real allies with military strength and resources. Ambassador Dae-hyun worked his contacts across the galaxy. 5 minor powers approached with proposals for military alliances. The Keltorian Consortium offered to triple their support. 2 council species privately suggested they would support sanctions against the Valtorians if humanity could demonstrate continued military capability. Most surprising was a Valtorian officer who defected to human custody. Junior Commander Talven had served on the Eternal Dominion during the Battle of Earth. He was disgusted by what he had witnessed. The wanton destruction, the lies told to justify it. He brought intelligence about internal divisions within the Empire. Not all Valtorians supported the war. Some saw it as a mistake that would destroy them all. The Galactic Council convened again. High Commander Zalvan presented the Valtorian position with careful precision. Humanity must be contained. Their rapid technological advancement threatened galactic stability. They had proven willing to deploy weapons of mass destruction. The Empire called for sanctions, travel restrictions, and oversight of human military development. It was a calculated strategy to strangle humanity economically. Ambassador Dae-hyun countered with evidence and logic. He acknowledged council concerns. Yes, humanity was advancing rapidly. Yes, they had deployed devastating weapons. But every innovation came from necessity, not ambition. He presented historical records of Valtorian aggression against dozens of species. He asked the council a simple question. Do you exist to maintain peace or to preserve the power of ancient empires? The council split down the middle. 6 species supported the Valtorian position, fearing human unpredictability. 5 species supported humanity, seeing an opportunity to challenge Valtorian dominance. 1 species abstained, recognizing that either choice carried enormous consequences. The debate grew heated. Council members questioned the legitimacy of the existing power structure for the first time in centuries. While public debates raged, secret negotiations took place in hidden channels. Intelligence Officer Hee-jin facilitated contact between Ambassador Dae-hyun and moderate elements within the Valtorian High Council. These moderates recognized that continued conflict served no one's interests. They proposed radical terms: formal peace, mutual recognition of borders, a demilitarized zone, technology sharing to benefit all species. The proposal would end Valtorian military dominance but preserve their economic and cultural influence. It would give humanity breathing room to develop without constant threat. It would establish new precedents for how powerful and weaker civilizations could coexist. Both sides had much to gain. Both sides had much to lose if the war continued. Then the negotiations leaked. Someone within the Valtorian military discovered the secret talks and exposed them. Hardline commanders viewed the proposed peace as surrender. They saw the moderates as traitors. A coup attempt erupted within the empire. The military hardliners tried to seize control of the High Council and impose their vision of total war. The coup failed. Loyal forces defeated the rebels, but in the chaos, a rogue battle group escaped and launched an unauthorized attack. Their target was New Horizon, a human colony at the edge of settled space. 3 million people lived there. The rogue commanders bombarded the colony for hours before friendly Valtorian forces could stop them. Commander Jiwoo was stationed at a military outpost near New Horizon. She received the distress calls and raced to help. Her ships arrived to find devastation. The colony's main city was destroyed. Fires burned everywhere. Bodies floated in the ruins. She led rescue operations, pulling survivors from collapsed buildings and damaged ships. But millions were already dead. The New Horizon attack destroyed any chance of immediate peace. Human public opinion exploded with rage. People demanded retaliation. They demanded justice. The secret negotiations became public knowledge, and many felt betrayed. How could their leaders negotiate with the monsters who kept attacking? Prime Minister Kyung-suk faced enormous political pressure. The moderate Valtorian faction offered to hand over the rogue commanders for trial. They provided evidence proving the attack was unauthorized. They apologized and offered reparations, but it was not enough. The damage was done. Trust was shattered. The human population would not accept anything less than military retaliation. Prime Minister Kyung-suk made the difficult decision. She authorized Admiral Tae-yang to launch a retaliatory strike against Valtorian military installations, not civilian targets, not population centers, military bases where the hardline faction had its strongest support. The goal was to weaken the warmongers while leaving room for eventual peace with the moderates. Ambassador Dae-hyun returned to human space. His diplomatic efforts had failed. The moderates were too weak, the hardliners too strong, the divide between the factions too deep. As he boarded his transport, he received a private message from High Commander Zalvan. It contained only 3 words. This was inevitable. Dae-hyun stared at those words for a long time. He realized the terrible truth. Zalvan had known from the beginning that war between their civilizations was inevitable. The Empire could not tolerate a rival. Humanity could not accept domination. They were on a collision course from the moment humans reached the stars. The only question was how many would die before it ended. Admiral Tae-yang assembled a strike fleet. His mission was precise. Hit the Valtorian shipyards at Valtoria Prime. Destroy their construction facilities. Cripple their ability to build new warships. Get in fast and get out before the main defense fleet could respond. It was the most dangerous operation humanity had attempted, striking at the heart of the Empire itself. The strike team trained for weeks. They studied every piece of intelligence. They planned for every contingency. Dr. Ha-jun provided new weapons specifically designed for this mission. Engineer Bora modified the ships for maximum speed and stealth. Everything had to work perfectly. There would be no second chances. On the eve of the mission, Tae-yang walked through his flagship and spoke with the crew. He did not lie to them. Many would not come back. This was not a glorious battle. This was a knife thrust in the dark. But it was necessary. Every ship they destroyed here was one less that would attack human colonies. Every facility they damaged bought more time for humanity to prepare. The crew understood. They volunteered anyway. Some had lost family on Terra Nova, others at New Horizon. All of them understood that this war would not end with half measures. The Valtorians had attacked home twice. Humanity would show them that such attacks came with a price. They would carry the war to the Empire's doorstep. The fleet departed in darkness. They jumped to hyperspace and began the long journey,